You know what the best way to really win the big game is to have the better team in the big game.
Welcome back to the latest edition of The Audible, presented by Trader Joe's. I am Bruce Feldman, joined by my colleague from The Athletic's, Ralph Russo. Stuart Mandel, not here. Ralph will explain why in a second. We have a really good show today. We're going to get into Ralph's latest AP rankings. We'll also talk about the biggest games this weekend, give our upset picks. We'll include Stu's upset picks and Stu's picks because he's been on fire. But first, there's a big news out of the Big 12, or something that we're keeping an eye on, and that involves Deion Sanders.
I think I got more blood clots. Cat's out the bag, all right? I think I got more blood clots, man. It don't make sense. I'm hurting like crazy. I got the doctor's appointment Monday to see what time it is. So that's what's going on. I'm not getting blood to my leg. That's why my leg is throbbing. I'm sorry to get that out, but thank you for noticing.
Yeah, big news insofar as I think you can't help but hear that, understand that Deion has had a whole bunch of other serious health issues to deal with this year. And now you wonder, listen, I think it's just simply fair to wonder what his future is as coach of Colorado. Will he walk away? Will he be forced to sort of walk away from this? I definitely think that there's a lot of people within the industry who are wondering what could be next at Colorado and keeping an eye on this situation. It's hard for us to speculate beyond that because I don't think it's necessarily fair to do that with another person's health. But without question, I think it raises the specter of what's going on at Colorado and how much longer will Coach Prime be able to coach the Buffs.
Yeah, Ralph, you and I both heard from different industry sources about there is concern around Colorado about his health. And obviously he came out and addressed it over the weekend. Something to keep an eye on. I mean, obviously we wish him well and hope that things pick up for him. Obviously he had a lot of health issues this summer, was able to make it back. But again, it's just one of those things where I think a lot of people around Boulder are really concerned and again, hope for the best.
Yeah. And I would just add one thing. We're recording Monday afternoon. He usually has his normal weekly press conference on Tuesdays. So there's a good chance you might be hearing this and there is possibly some more news in terms of maybe how that doctor's visit went and whatnot. So, again, we're addressing it on Monday. He'll talk about it on Tuesday and we'll see where it goes from there. And again, we're just hoping for the best for Coach Prime.
Yeah. And now the elephant that's not in the room, where is our guy Stu? Is he off to the bank just cashing checks? What's going on?
Yeah, last week we missed him for a day because he was literally quite dealing with a couple of assignments. Today, it sounds like a little bit of technical difficulties, not really his fault. Apparently, the Stu estate is having maybe a wing installed. Right. They're expanding the manor at the Stuart Mandel estate. So the construction issues, some technology issues, Stu can't be here. We'll make the most of it without him. When we do our picks, he will give them to me and we will soldier on again without Stu. It's not easy. I think of him as our leader, but nonetheless, we persist.
Yeah, we tried. At one point, we went to a different part of, as you referred to it, as the estate, and tried to get Stu wired in, and literally it looked like he was on the sun. So we were unable to do that. There was a lot of, it sounded like he was in a sawmill at one point. So we'll do the best we can without Stu this time.
So let's talk ball, and let's talk Red River rivalry. We've talked the hell out of Texas, but mostly we've talked the hell out of Arch, right? Let's put Arch aside and have a little bit of a different discussion, Bruce, about the coach of Texas and, what maybe we should be talking about when it comes to Steve Sarkisian.
Yeah, I noticed this as we're taping Monday morning, where some people on my timeline were bringing up, a lot of talk about James Franklin can't win the big game. shouldn't we also be having that conversation about Steve Sarkisian, who is 2-8 against top 10 opponents at Texas? And I think that's a valid question at this point, right? Now, obviously, the game they just lost was not against the top 10 opponent. Florida wasn't. But Ohio State was. That's who they played in the beginning of the season. I think the other questions here that are starting to kind of come into focus a little bit beyond just Arch is they don't run the ball well now. They can't protect Arch. He got sacked 6 times, 10 penalties last weekend against Florida. And Florida looked like they just wanted it more than Texas did. Now they're going to play an Oklahoma team that is in the top 10, that has looked really good, especially on defense. We'll see what happens. Sark had said at his press conference on Monday that they are preparing like John Mateer is going to play. Now, from what I had heard a week or so ago, John Mateer, the optimistic hope out of Oklahoma was that he could come back for the next game, and that's against South Carolina, not for this one. John Mateer, super tough kid. Yeah, sorry.
And even Brent Venables said after the game Saturday that they weren't really expecting to have Mateer this week. So even on the Oklahoma side, like Texas should be preparing for Mateer. I get that. But on the Oklahoma side, it doesn't sound like they're particularly optimistic, and they're looking like they're going to start Michael Hawkins.
Yeah. So let me circle into this point, though, on Sark, right? For a long time, he's been known as an offensive guru and has put up big numbers. The issue where it's come up just in, the last couple of years, they have struggled in the red zone. That was a big issue for them in the playoff, and it was, again, a big issue against Ohio State. I mean, depending on whether you look at red zone conversions or red zone touchdowns, they're like around 100. It's not good. And I think there's that piece of it. But I want to ask you, do you think it's a valid criticism of Sark that he can't win the big game, or he just is not at his best? I mean, I can think of plenty of times where he's in a game that feels big. Certainly the games against Alabama when he was still trying to elevate Texas, where I thought he aced the test. Remember, you had Quinn Ewers young, and Quinn Ewers get banged up, and they still played really well. But beyond that, the numbers aren't great. So what do you make of it?
So I find these conversations interesting, especially because coming into the season, and, again, big wrong. I was big wrong on Texas, sort of celebrating them as moving into a new stratosphere this year when they were going to become the reload team. But within those conversations, the interesting thing was acknowledging the reality of, I remember having these discussions with my editors and maybe even having it with you, like the thing on the other side of this for the ascendant Texas argument that they are truly back. They are going to be the reload team now, which is, if they aren't, what does that turn out for Sark, right? Like, he is not totally rebuilt his reputation. And I mean that in a coaching standpoint. I know he had some personal issues that cost him the USC job, but from just a coaching perspective, right? He was 7-5 Sark at Washington, even though he did a pretty nice job taking a program that was down. And then it
way down, way down,
right? Winless when he took over before. And then he got to USC, and again, personal issues. It never really launched. And he got to Texas, and they have improved steadily since then. But you could almost see this coming, right? If he didn't capitalize on this team, now all of us, because this comes for every coach, right? This conversation comes for them all, which is, if you don't quite get it done soon enough. Kirby was dealing with this for a little bit, right? Before he finally broke through and beat Alabama. Like, you knew this conversation was coming for Sark. So I'm not here to necessarily validate it, other than to say, this is kind of the cycle of life for coaches. We give you a couple of years to build it up. Once you get close a couple of times, we kind of give you a few mulligans, but then we start holding you to a standard that may not be completely realistic, but we start holding you to a higher standard.
Yeah, I think that's very accurate. I mean, of how this is. I hate to say it as bluntly as, like, the media builds you up, then the media tears you down. And I think in the context of this, it is surprising to me, not that they're struggling so much on offense. just to kind of put a fine point on that, 116th in third down offense, 109th in red zone offense, and 88th in red zone touchdown percentage, right? All those numbers scream, hey, we have some inexperienced players who are not playing very well. That's not just Arch. That's the O-line. Run game has been kind of meh. There's just a lot of things that are concerning, and I think they're all obviously connected. The part that was surprising to me was this was supposed to be as good a defense as there was in the country, and it didn't look like that the other day when DJ Lagway lit them up. Pete Kwiatkowski, terrific defensive coordinator, but something really looked off about them, and I don't know if it's one of those things where it just starts to be contagious, where, you're struggling on one side, then all of a sudden it kind of bleeds into the other side. The numbers are what when it comes to the narrative about, well, can Sark win the big game? Well, clearly Sark can win big games. I mean, he's done it. I mean, James Franklin won a few big games, but it's not like he's winning many of them. And that's the part that, again, if you ask me right now, and I'm going to spring forward to our pick segment into this, if you ask me right now, I would pick Texas. I think they'll respond. I know Oklahoma's defense is playing in an elite level, but I still feel like, Michael Hawkins right now, Kent State's a tough team to get a read on. It's just they were so bad, but they don't run the ball particularly well unless Mateer's running it. Torrey Blaylock's been a really good freshman, but again, Jaden Ott, I thought last week would be a breakout weekend for him. It really wasn't. So give me Texas to respond to the criticism. Ralph, you were on the Texas bandwagon. You're kind of off. You're getting back on.
Yeah, I probably will this week. The nature of the Red River rivalry, which always is a challenge for me. The nature of that rivalry is we get some unexpected results, right? I remember covering it one year and Charlie Strong had the golden hat on afterwards, and then he was fired, right, the next year. And before that, Mac Brown's final season in Texas, he won that game. We've seen some results there that end up getting a little weird. I liked your X's and O's breakdown, and I have some of those same concerns about Oklahoma's offense. Oklahoma's pass rush is going to be a tough thing for Arch, but I could see a really sloppy game here. I will say this, it's hard for me to put my finger on the you can't win the big games thing. It's always one of those things that it's hard for me to quantify. I've heard interesting explanations about the red zone issues for Sark that make sense to me and are a little more tangible. And that is he's so good at manipulating space, right? That's what he is as a play caller. When we talk about how good a play caller Sark is, and he gets a lot of credit, I think deservedly so, for being a very good play caller, a lot of it has to do with manipulating space, right? It's side to side, it's motion, it's all of a sudden creating space for his playmakers. And simply put, when you get within the red zone, there's less space to deal with. There's less space to work with, and they are less inclined to just bowl you over, even when they've had good offensive lines. And this year they don't. So yeah, I can understand that part of the criticism of Sark, and I could sort of explain why. Again, the big game thing, it goes for Franklin too, and I think a lot of others, which I've always sort of said, you can't win the big game until you do. Bobby Bowden couldn't win the big game, and then he did. Tom Osborne couldn't win the big game, and then he did. So that's Mac Brown couldn't win the big game until he did. So I have a hard time. I acknowledge that it exists, but I have a hard time explaining it.
Yeah, like the guy who has the great record against top 10 opponents is Kalen DeBoer. And then the thing that comes with it now is but you really struggle with the games you should win. It's kind of one of those things. And I think it's kind of what you were alluding to before. It's like we're throwing darts at this thing. And eventually, you hit the bullseye. But
you know what the best way to really win the big game is to have the better team in the big game. That's what Saban is a great coach, but if you go back and look at all the big games, he was also generally had the better team and was favored. So that's the best way to win the big game when you're a college football coach, is have the better team in that big game.
All right. Do we have Stu's pick for this game? We should loop him in on this.
Yeah, let's see. I'm going to do a quick
It's like you're opening up an envelope.
Yes, I can't. Stu, he even gave a little commentary here, so I'm going to speak for Stu. I honestly can't believe Texas is favored in this game, and yes, Texas is about a 2.5 point favorite. I think the last time I saw that line, that's about right, about 2.5. Favored against OU, which is the number one defense in the SEC. Texas' offensive line is a mess. So from Stu, simply put, boomer.
All right, Stu.
So he's going, and listen, Stu's been kicking ass on these picks. Maybe we'll update the scoreboard when we get back from break. How's that sound, Bruce?
All right, so it's me and you on the UT side, and Stu is boomer. Okay.
All right, let's get in some picks. I will play the role of Stu as best I can. Tall task. And maybe, actually, to make it a little easier, Bruce, how about we do this? Want to give Stu's pick first? How about, are you cool with that? I'll give Stu's pick first good. For each game. Okay. And we're going to start at the game that I'm going to be at. Apparently, I've become the Athletics Oregon correspondent from New York because I'll be in Eugene. I'm very happy to, by the way, be in Eugene. I love that part of the country. I'll be in Eugene for Indiana, Oregon. It's still weird that this is a conference game. It's still weird that Indiana plays big games, but it's a top 10 matchup for Indiana. So it's an 8.5 point spread for Oregon. Oregon is an 8.5 point favorite in the game. We'll start with Stu, and then I'll throw it to you. Stu said, I expect the Hoosiers to play well, but it's hard to pick against the Ducks at home. They cover the 8.5. So put Stu on board for the Ducks.
Yeah, I'm gonna ride in the same direction as Stu. I just think Indiana. I know they whipped on UCLA on a West Coast trip last year. That UCLA team is not this Oregon team. I think they're going to really struggle away from home. I think they have been a much better team when they're home than when they're on the road. I like the Ducks winning it going away.
I hate going with the consensus here. Okay. Again, we talk about this. You don't like to be the game day board where we all pick the same thing. I am very tempted just for that. With that number, 8.5 points is kind of big. My instinct, I didn't know where you guys were going, and I was probably leaning towards Oregon. So I'm going to keep with my gut here. I'm going to go with Oregon. Hey, frankly, we should all be following Stu because he's been nailing these picks. So I'll take Oregon in the 8.5 too. I think I can't say, it's hard to say they're a little more explosive, but I think you saw what Iowa did to Indiana in a road game, managing to slow them down a little bit. I could see Oregon having a similar effect on Indiana. Again, slowing that offense down a little bit, putting some pressure on Fernando Mendoza, and the Ducks having a little more success on the offensive side.
All right. Next up, let's go another Big Ten game that doesn't feel like a Big Ten game. USC against Michigan. Last year, Michigan was on the ropes, and then Kalel Mullings put everybody on his back and just ran downfield, and the Wolverines found a way to win. What does Stu say is going to happen in this game?
All right, got to go over to Stu and put my Stu hat on here. Okay, so you guys know how I feel about cross-country travel. Yes, I mean, not just personally. I know Stu himself doesn't like to do cross-country travel. It gets him very sluggish. But he also believes that it hurts the teams in the Big Ten that are doing it. Now, maybe he has a point. We saw what happened to Penn State last week. We saw what happened to Washington starting slow against Maryland. I don't like completely dismissing the travel thing, but I do tend to believe it's part of a bigger picture, those things. But anyway, now USC is favored in this game, which I think might be a little surprising to some. They're favored by 2.5. And Stu is taking, as he said, USC just has more weapons. He thinks the cross-country travel is a killer. So Stu's taking the Trojans. What do you think, Bruce?
I'm tempted to agree with him for the very reason I'm a believer in that stuff. I feel like it matters a lot more than a lot of us probably initially thought it would. As much as I think that, Michigan seems like a tough matchup for USC, how they play, because they are so physical in the trenches and they have a power running game. I know that USC is upgraded talent-wise on the defensive line. Those guys have played well, but then when they got up against a real physical Illinois team, they didn't play well, and they got mauled. It's home. I just like right now what I'm seeing from the Michigan run game, and I do think their defense has got some nastiness to it. I think that's a tough matchup for the USC offensive line. As I want to agree with Stu, but I'm going to go with the Wolverines to go in there and get the win. Break the tie, Ralph.
Yeah, I always know I can get a good injury report from you from what's going on over at USC because you're not that far away from them. They played the Illinois game, I think, without Ramsey, right? Kamari Ramsey, who is their best defensive player. Maybe, I think, fair to say, pretty close to being their best defensive player. Him or Eric
Gentry, yeah.
Yeah, a little banged up on the offensive line in that game, too. I do wonder if they are healthy, if they are more healthy than they were against Illinois, that makes them hold up a little better. You're right. It's just, for the last couple of years, it has been very hard to get on board with a USC sort of breakthrough, right? We thought we might see it against Illinois. They went into that game, and Illinois, you say Illinois is pretty physical, but Illinois had some defensive issues. Illinois wasn't running the ball the way they were last year going into that game. They sort of found their running game in that game. So I get that. So the matchup feels definitely like, hey, we're going to see USC get sort of like bullied again. That's basically Michigan's identity. They still haven't fully developed that passing game, but maybe that's the good news, right? Maybe I'm thinking of this wrong. The biggest problem for USC has been the back end. Their secondary is young and really vulnerable. So, you know what? I'll take USC. I'll take USC to finally get a little bit of a breakthrough victory against Lincoln Riley. I don't feel necessarily particularly good about this pick. It's been hard to trust USC, but I think because Michigan has some limitations at receiver and in the passing game, that actually helps USC. So I'll take the Trojans whose offense, by the way, is humming. Even against Illinois, other than a couple of mistakes, the offense is humming.
Yeah, I will say this in Michigan's defense. Donovan McCulley has stepped up. He was the Indiana transfer who was good in 2023, was a non-factor for Indiana, got banged up, and then really did nothing for them. Big physical receiver, 6'5", 215. He had a big game last week, and I think that's the best thing that could happen for Bryce Underwood is finding a go-to receiver, especially one who's not a tight end on the outside. That's the thing that's been missing from Michigan. One of the things really, they've had a non-existent passing game. They're starting to look like they have one. We'll see. I think it's a we'll see game for them if that's a real thing. The passing game is starting to come to life. It's also a we'll see thing because I think this is a prove it game for Lincoln Riley and their guys in the trenches. You didn't look very good against Illinois. We had a lot of penalties and a lot of like lack of focus. Bounce back and prove it against this team with the most, one of the most famous helmets in football.
Yeah, I don't want to linger on this game too much, but they are two pretty big brands. And that you just sort of said the reason why you end up having such pause picking USC in these games the last couple of years. It's not so much like you look at the numbers and like the offense is humming and the defense is a little better and they're getting sacks, but it's like, hey man, are you going to not fall over yourself with penalties? Are you going to not take a touchdown off the board? Are you going to, play tight and like clean special teams here? Because it's so often it feels like that's the stuff that undermines Lincoln Riley's teams over the last couple of years. Not necessarily just, they had a bad matchup here or there. It's, man, play a clean football game in one of these spots. And I think that's the biggest issue right now is playing a clean football game in a big game, which I think gives a lot of people who are, want to hitch their wagon to USC some pause. And you know what? It still feels like a Rose Bowl. It'll always feel like a Rose Bowl. All right, so our third pick will go down to the SEC. Alabama coming off of its big win against Vanderbilt, which came off of a big win against Georgia. So Alabama is rolling right now. Tide is rolling into Mizzou. we'll go to Stu first. Alabama is a 3-point favorite on the road. Stu says, I think people have overcorrected a little bit on Bama. I also think this might be their toughest game left. Roll through my head. Yeah, that might be, well, Tennessee might have a word with that. Alabama has the 88th ranked run defense in the country. Mizzou has the number one rushing offense. Stu is going with Mizzou straight up. And I'll just tell him, like, just to be brief here, Stu pretty much picked my pick and the analysis. So I don't know if I have much to add on this, Bruce. So feel free to riff a little bit if you're going a different way.
I am going a different way. I think Alabama's defense has gotten better with Tim Keenan coming back. They really missed his leadership, not just his physicality. And I think where that showed up last week was Vandy got up on them twice, 1-7-0, then 14-7. And as one of the coaches on their staff had told me, without Keenan, they missed that guy who would be on the sideline, when something went wrong, and just kind of rattled his teammates to me like, hey, you think they're more talented than us? I don't think so. Let's go, prove it. Not so many, it'll probably a lot more aggressive language. And where that showed up, the issues with Alabama last year was they get punched in the stomach on the road and they would not respond, or they did not respond well. I think they are in a different place now mentally. Again, we'll find out, but I really do think that they probably are a more mature team. I love how Ty Simpson is playing. The run game started to come to life with them, with Jam Miller coming back. I think they were a little more committed to it. I like what I see from Missouri's offense with Hardy, with Prebula. I think they really are dynamic in the run game. I think they'll give Alabama some trouble, but I like Alabama to respond. I think they're more battle tested now than this Mizzou team that really hasn't. I mean, they played South Carolina, but they haven't really faced too much. Kansas gave them a game. And even when both Lenora Sellers and Jalen Daniels threw the ball well against them, I think that is something that I think the Tide can exploit.
Yeah,
so give me the Tide to win.
Yeah, and I do find myself thinking that Alabama might be the team that emerges out of this clustered SEC. But I don't know. Maybe I'm also rooting for chaos a little bit. Like if Alabama were to lose this week, coming off of 2 big wins, where you think it is finally emerging as the team to beat in the SEC, it will end up making the SEC even more murky. So maybe I'm just rooting for chaos here. The one thing I also would say, it's not even just that they're not great against the run. This happened with Vanderbilt last week. They're giving up some very explosive runs, right? Most of Vanderbilt's rushing was built on a 65-yard run by Alexander. I think Cedric Alexander, I think is the kid name. And then they had a 36-yard run, a quarterback run from Pavia. But, like you say, well, that, otherwise they're doing okay, if not for those explosive plays. The problem is, if you're giving up those explosive plays, you're going to find yourself in a hole. And I think the way Prebula runs and Ahmad Hardy, and they've got a couple of other pretty good backs there at Mizzou, I just think it's a really interesting matchup. And I am almost in many ways rooting for chaos. And a Mizzou win, I think, brings a little more chaos to the SEC. All right, well, let's get into our upset picks. Which is another thing where Stu has been pretty good. He is rocking, by the way. Just to put a little update on the standings here. Sorry, Bruce.
You're trying to jinx him with this. This is definitely like the guy who hasn't missed a free throw in like 7 games.
There is a little bit of like he hasn't missed a field goal under 40 yards in 4 years, and now bang, it goes off the upright, right? Or it's the reliever.
Let me ask you this to not to overproduce the show. When you envision Stu as a clutch athlete, Give me your. Stu's not here to defend himself, so let's be jerks.
Who is the athlete that I think I'm? You know what? I'm not going there. I'm not going to allow you to do that to our pal Stu. I'm just simply not going there. We're going to go right into these upset picks. I'm sure Stu's more rock and roll. He's more musician than athlete at his heart. So we all have different ways that we get to be cool. Upset picks. Well, no. First of all, I need to humiliate you for a second after you tried to trash our friend, and that is Stu is leading the way in the pick standings. He's 11-5. I am 8-8, very average, which, kind of sums me up. And Bruce, 5-11, man. So you got to pick it up.
I'm dragging down the show. I am absolutely dragging down the show.
I'm just saying, like our resident most, plugged in expert, got to pick it up. Upset picks this week. We'll start with Stu. I got to tell you, I don't love this one. Like I think Stu was rushed. I think he was a little flustered by his technical issues and at home. He's going with Oregon State +3 at home over Wake. That's about as bad a travel game as you can find. Again, he keeps harping on the travel stuff. Just constantly harping on the travel stuff because he gets jet lag. He just assumes everybody else can't perform. And he also mentions that Miami to Pullman, apparently Washington State. Washington State's going to Miami this week, right? Is that true?
No, Washington State is playing Ole Miss.
Ole Miss, I'm sorry. Yes, Ole Miss this week, which is another terrible trip. Listen, Oregon State's very, very bad. So, he is, Stu's going to take the Beavers +3 over Wake to win straight up. I've got mine, but I'm going to go to you, Bruce. Who do you think is going to be your upset pick this week? And you've gotten one of these right. So let's see if you can.
I think this feels like it's cheating. This is a good game on Friday that I don't think a lot of people are talking about. You have North Texas undefeated against USF, which obviously had a really nice win over Florida, then went up and smashed Boise, but they did lose to Miami. And they're a very good team. They're also a 1.5 point underdog as we're doing this against the Mean Green. Give me the Bulls and Alex Golish's offense.
Yeah, North Texas has been amazing. And that's a great one. I'm very much looking forward to a game that will help decide an American Conference race that will, I think a lot of people believe, will decide a playoff spot.
It could. It won't for sure, but it certainly will play a role in this.
Right. I mean, just to be clear, there's not a G5 spot that people are playing for, but you get 5 conference champions in there, and right now the American certainly looks like very well positioned to have its conference champion in there. The fact that it's a 1.5 point spread is not exactly the boldest thing, but yeah, I know you've been struggling with it. So
I'm wounded. Give me a break.
All right, so I'm going a little bigger. I'm taking a bigger swing here. Pitt is getting 10.5 from Florida State. It is a road game. Now, here's the thing. I think if I was just playing this as a give me the points, they'll keep it close, that seems like a safer bet. But what I remember when I used to pick games weekly for the Associated Press, one of the things I often would say is like, hey, if I'm just going to pick it, if I'm going to pick the underdog to cover, I might as well just pick them to win, right? One or two, you have to take your shots. I think our friend Mason Heinchel, the new quarterback for Pitt, who made his first start last week. He was a freshman. In fact, I got that wrong on the show. He is actually from Ohio, the Toledo area. He is not a Pennsylvania kid. However, if you watched Pitt's first few games, they were getting really rough play out of the quarterback spot. So rough that, like, if you get better play out of the quarterback spot, the Panthers probably win at least one of the 2 games they lost to Louisville or West Virginia. So this is not necessarily me being, super down on Florida State, but I do think that we're seeing a little bit of that. What happened week 1 with Alabama and Florida State might have been a bit of an anomaly. I think their defense is a little susceptible. So again, if you're going to take them to be close, you might as well go all in and take them for the upset. So I'll take Pitt to do a very Pitt thing, which is lose to West Virginia, a terrible West Virginia team, and then go on the road and beat a pretty good Florida State team.
There's a lot of stuff going on in that, Ralph. Okay. But
there's a lot of stuff going on there. So here's the deal. Let's take a little break here. We'll come back. You can yell at me for my AP votes this week, but mostly we want to get into a conversation about how the wide open Big 12 might not be that wide open this year. So on Mondays for Tuesday's show, I tend to have the guys nitpick me on how I vote in the AP poll. They weren't necessarily looking to like slam me this week. They were generally okay with most of my votes, but it allowed us an opportunity because I had Texas Tech number 7 in the country. That's only a little ahead of where they are ranked. I believe they are ranked 9th. But it's heady times in Lubbock. And I guess the question is, Bruce, again, we talk about the Big 12. Oh, it's wide open. Any of 7 or 8 teams could win the Big 12. Hell, maybe 11 teams could win the Big 12. Do we think we've seen enough of Texas Tech to look at them and think, no, that team's different. They're the clear favorites here?
It's looking that way. A couple of things have happened. Now, first of all, they went to one of the toughest places to play against a team that seems like they would be a great truth serum. Like if you're not real, they're going to expose it with the way Kyle Whittingham's roster is set up. Texas Tech went there and they out-toughed the Utes. And they did it with a backup quarterback for a big chunk of the game, a talented backup quarterback. But that speaks to the depth. It also, like, they're getting pressure without doing a lot of funky blitzing and a lot of other exotic stuff. Right now, David Bailey, who was a huge get out of the portal, started his college career at Stanford, was a big recruit for the Cardinal, has been fantastic. We talk a lot about Ruben Bain, and rightly so, the Miami edge rusher. But David Bailey is having a similar impact in the Big 12. And it's not just him. They got like 4 other guys in that D-line. They've spent a lot of money, of Cody Campbell's money, and it's paying off. So the other thing that's happened, though, the team I picked to win the Big 12, which had been rolling along until I think injuries got the best of them, especially in the secondary, was Iowa State, right? Last week, they got knocked off against Cincinnati, who is playing well. But again, Iowa State, you have one position, cornerback, that gets decimated in a conference where you have a lot of good quarterbacks. I think Arizona State, I still think they're a challenging team. TCU is dangerous. BYU, sort of quietly undefeated. Bear Bachmeier has been impressive, the freshman running quarterback. And they got a lot of pieces around them. But right now, I feel like they are the class of the Big 12. It wouldn't shock me if they didn't win it because it's still the Big 12. I want to spin it differently, though. Do you think Texas Tech is actually the best team in the state of Texas?
Ooh, I like that question. I've liked Texas A&M.
You love Texas A&M. You have Texas A&M number 3 in the poll. That's higher than anybody has them, right?
Exactly. And it's nice to be right on some things because I'm taking my lumps these days on calling Texas the next Alabama and the national champion this year. But I was high on Texas A&M coming in. Boy, that's a great question. I love the fact that you sprung it on me like this. I would say I would probably lean toward A&M. I really love their depth at running back. Last week, Le'Veon Moss didn't play for a big chunk of the game. Reuben Owens, who was a 5-star, just slides right in, and he has a big game. I like the fact that Reed is a pretty good passer. Maybe a little rough around the edges, but it certainly compares well to Baron Morton and what they're doing at Texas Tech in terms of quarterback. They're a lot more explosive now, A&M. The other thing that A&M has done over the last couple of weeks, and we talked about it on, I think a little bit on Sunday's show, is they've tightened up that defense. For the first 3 weeks of the season, that defense was, what's going on here? Now it's like, 1 for 26 on third downs the last couple of weeks. Torian York is playing amazing at linebacker. We knew he was good, but it's sort of tightening up the rest of that defense. Cassius Howell's been a menace. Talk about edge rushers who have been doing really well. So here's the positive. Here's why this is an important conversation for Texas Tech. The simple fact that it gives me pause and that you're asking that question, that's what the Big 12 craves. That's what Texas Tech craves, is we don't want to just be the best team in the Big 12. We want to be a team that wins playoff games. I think we were poking at you a couple of weeks ago when you suggested this, right? that you were like, hey, okay, not is Texas Tech the best team in the Big 12? Can they make a run? And at first it was like, hey, maybe put the brakes on there. But more and more, I definitely like to see a little more out of them. They got to play Arizona State in a couple of weeks. They got to play BYU, big physical team that is starting to convince me that they got it going on there. I find myself thinking that whether I think that they are the best team in Texas or not, the more important thing is we have to think about it. And that means that maybe the Big 12 does have a team that can not just, that can separate a little bit, win the Big 12 and win a playoff game or two. And I think that's the important part of this conversation. Don't you, Bruce?
I do. I have two things. So one I want to say is quietly a very impressive aspect of what the Red Raiders have done has been the run game. And they spent money on the offensive line too. They upgraded that. But also, remember, right before the season, their number one back, Quentin Joyner, who had transferred in from USC, he goes out for the year with a knee injury. And so Cameron Dickey has been terrific, but both backs have been really, really good. And this is a physical team. This is not when Mike was coaching and they were throwing it all over the place and the run game wasn't much of a factor. Like, they're physical. This is a really, I feel like this is a very complete team, to be honest. The other thing I wanted to ask you, because we were talking about Marcel Reed a minute ago, like, I forgot who it was they beat. It might have been the LSU game last year, where I think they talked to him after the game, and I was like, man, he's impressive. Like, you just see, like, oh, there was something about him. He was impressive in the game, but even after the game, I remember, there was something about him that was like, oh, I could see how people could follow him. There was just like a focus or whatever. You did a big story in the offseason about him. I remember it was around the same time I did a Lenora Sellers story. I was curious, what was your impressions of him from being around him?
Yeah. So the best way to describe it was, and again, I got about a half an hour with him, talking to him. However, you get a little feel, and I think the feel was very comfortable in his own skin, right? As when you're going to become the leader of a team, the face of a team, that matters to a certain degree, right? And I think that not only was he comfortable becoming the leader of a team and embracing that, but I also think the team around him seemed very comfortable with him being that. Now, he talked about not the most vocal, not a guy who gets in people's faces. Luckily, I think they have some guys like that. They have a very experienced offensive line there. A lot of fourth and fifth year guys. They're talking about Torrey and York. But I think the leaders of that team, some of those offensive linemen, York himself, talked about when I was there, how they told Marcel, like, this is your team, man. You're our guy. You're our guy. And he just, again, he seemed like a very calm kid, a kid who let things come to him and was very comfortable being the type of leader he was, being his type of leader, right? You don't necessarily have to be a fiery leader all the time. You have to be the leader that you are comfortable with to show yourself. Because I think what happens is when you try to be someone other than you are not, your teammates can spot you as a fraud and you become a guy who's not necessarily a good leader. So I think he's a good player. I thought he was one of the more undervalued quarterbacks coming into the season, and it certainly worked out that way. You want to wrap a bow on the Big 12 here. I think we'll get a better idea about who the contenders to Texas Tech will be this weekend when Utah plays at Arizona State. Pretty big game, really, because if Utah does win that game, now all of a sudden you start playing with tiebreakers and things along those lines. But like, really interesting game between Arizona State and Utah in the Big 12 this week as well.
Yeah, two good running quarterbacks, and we'll see what Morgan Scalley has for Jordan Tyson, who's been a dominant receiver, obviously, with Sam Levitt's legs just finding a way to make a big play when they need it. It is a sneaky, really good game.
All right, so we very much missed Stu this week. Nonetheless, we carried on. We felt like we made him a bit of a part of the show anyway. I did my best Stu impersonation, or at least carried on with Stu. Do we want to do one quick thing? We wanted to really thank our presenting sponsor, Trader Joe's, for sending us these very cool bags, which can be used for trick-or-treating. I don't have anybody trick-or-treating age in my house anymore. Bruce, you have trick-or-treaters in your house. Your kids still trick-or-treating?
They do. They're 11, so I think that they're. It's not quite the same as when they were like elementary school kids, but yeah, it's still a cool thing to see a lot of little kids getting to be little kids.
Yeah. And yeah, right. I'm past that point, but yeah, they're cuter when once they get to be about 11, 12, they're more mischievous, right? They want to they want to break things on Halloween more than they want to just get candy and look cute in their costumes. All right. That is our show for today. We'll be back on Thursday where we'll answer your mailbag questions. Hopefully Stu will be back. I think the Manor will be in order. I think the new West Wing of the Manor will be fully functional. So Stu should be back for our show on Thursday. Please be sure to send your questions to theaudiblepod@gmail.com. Every episode of The Audible is on YouTube at Audible Show. Join us there Sunday mornings live, 11:30 a.m. Eastern, 8:30 Pacific. We are a West Coast Bias podcast for a live breakdown of the weekend's games. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you in a couple of days.